Well, today we're reading Shakespeare Sonnet 2, which is an extenuation of the first argument made in Sonnet 1. So he's still persuading this young man to marry. And Sonnet 2 introduces a new argument for why he should marry. So here's Shakespeare's Sonnet 2. I'll read it and then I'll give some commentary on it. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed, of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold. So let's apply the microscope of criticism. Samuel Johnson talks about the microscope and the telescope of criticism. So we're going to look closely at the individual components and then get a broader sense of what the poem's saying on whole. So if we look here in the first sentence, we have a hypothetical situation here. It's imaginary. The narrator of this poem is calling the youth to imagine when he's older. He says, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. So we have this metaphor in this verb, actually. Metaphors aren't always nouns, they're sometimes verbs. Besiege is a war metaphor. But also we have 40 here, which basically just means a long time and isn't there just to be exact. It just means when 40 winters, the rough parts of a year, have attacked you. So when age attacks you. But I do want to mention that 40 does have a significance in biblical numerology. Noah, for instance, in the book of Genesis was in the ark 40 days and 40 nights as it rained. The children of Israel wandered around the desert for 40 years waiting for the older generation, the wicked generation, to die off. And Christ was in the desert for 40 days before starting his ministry. So 40 is a number that means a long time in which a lot happens, a lot of change takes place. So it's almost a period of purging. And what here is being purged? The youth's proud livery, his beauty. So here's a metaphor in a noun form. So we have when 40 winters shall wage war on thy brow, forehead, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. So notice this measure, this meter here, and dig deep trenches. That's not quite iambic. Here we have an iamb and dig deep trenches, but there's a relentless emphasis here that what's happening is somewhat violent, and the meter represents that to an extent. And dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. This is a metaphor. What's the metaphor for? His brow or forehead. You know, when you get older, you get those lines across your forehead. That's what he's talking about here. Thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, are so admired. So a livery is a uniform, usually fancy. It's a type of pretty dress. It's a vocabulary that's no longer in use, or as much. Thy proud livery, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on, meaning admired, will then be a tattered weed of small worth held. Now, a weed does mean a plant that you don't want, but it also means a piece of clothing that's not worth much. In Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, Florizel talks about Perdita's garments as weeds. These, your unusual weeds, do give a life, or something like that. So weeds just mean weed, it's just clothes, just like livery. So here's the hypothetical situation extended in the following line. So that's the first quatrain, an imagined situation. Then he says, then being asked, where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. So if somebody asks you, the narrator says, talking to the young man, if somebody asks you, where did your beauty go? What did you spend it on? What will you have to show for? If you say that, well, you consumed your beauty within your own deep sunken eyes, and remember the bright eyes of Sonnet 1. If you haven't read Sonnet 1, definitely read it, because the imagery here interlocks. The deep sunken eyes that in Sonnet 1 fed on their own fuel. In Sonnet 1, he also calls him a glutton, which has that idea of eating. This were an all-eating shame if you were to say that, well, in my old age, I don't have anything to show for my beauty of my youth. I simply enjoyed it myself. That would be a shame, he says, and a thriftless or a worthless praise. Now notice this next quatrain, the final quatrain, the final 4 lines. And he says, it would be better. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count, and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. So he's saying that if you were to say, well, this my child is what I have to show for my existence all these years upon the earth, that would be a more deserved praise. Beauty's use, this also is kind of a financial word at this time. Beauty's use could mean an investment or interest that you accrue on a loan. So the child is almost an interest. So that's something that will come up in Sonnet 6, by the way, so watch for that. Let me say, if you can say that this child here shall sum your count, another financial word here, and make your old excuse, that would be a better way to answer the question, what did you do with all your beauty? Now, in the background of all this, in Sonnet 1, we saw an allusion to Ovid's Metamorphoses and Narcissus. Here we have one of Jesus' parables, the parable of the talent, in which a lord gives a sum of money to 3 of his servants. 2 of the servants spend it well. One of them just buries it in a field, and no interest is accrued on it, and he's punished. So Shakespeare, or the narrator here in this poem, is saying that you are like the servant who buried his talent and didn't use what gifts he had. In the description, there's a reference to that parable. Now the final couplet says, this were to be made new when thou art old. What this is this? Here we have a demonstrative pronoun with no noun. What this? This fair child. So this fair child were to be made new when thou art old. Here we have that pair of opposites again. We saw 2 pairs of opposites, or 3 in Sonnet 1. Here we have to have a fair child is to be made new when you are old. Remember the riper rose of Sonnet 1 and the new air that carries his image. And the final line, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. Blood meaning family or child. And also we have this pair of opposites as well. Here in the couplet, Shakespeare loves to do that, by the way. And see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. So when you're old and you're cold, you'll be able to look on your child and see your blood warm, he's saying. It's kind of strange because you might be wondering, well, why does this narrator care so much about this young man marrying? Why doesn't he just leave him alone? And I guess that's a fair question. It's just a different time and place. And the Elizabethan worldview and the kind of mindset, it was a different community at the time. And there is literary precedence for this argument, by the way. Erasmus has a famous epistle to a young man convincing him to marry or persuading him to marry. And it's thought that these first 17 sonnets of Shakespeare are based on that. So let's read it again, getting this, now that we have this final sense of the poem. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed, of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise, How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold. Hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to check out the description below for information, and I will see you all next time.